All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. Greetings and welcome back once again. This is Amuna. Nice and rested I am, not so tired as I usually am. Greetings and welcome to Solonomics, Love Project, all that beautiful stuff. We just so happen to be doing the 4-year anniversary special. And why not do it with Uncle Tom's Cabin? I haven't read it before. And so we're going to be listening along. We're on chapter 4. And if you have missed the other installments, feel free to go back and catch up. So just to do a quick recap, the conversation was had for Tom, which is the best Negro that Shelby had to be sold because Shelby was in debt. And the slave trader wanted not only to take not Shelby, but Tom, but also Henry, which was a young boy. And so that's what happened in chapter 1 and chapter 2. Eliza's son also, which is an enslaved woman. Her son, what was her son's name? Remind me. I think it was George. No, not her son, her husband. um, he's upset and he's declared that he's going to run away because his master is a haterator. And so, yeah, that's where we at right now. George is like, yo, I'm about to peace out. And Eliza is holding inside that her child, which is the child that she and George has, may also be sold. So that was the Amuna edition of the recap. And now let's get into chapter 4. How's everybody doing? Can I be heard well? I see people popping in and popping out. Hopefully I can be heard. Let me get a microphone check before I click it so I don't have to re-click it. We're going to jump into chapter 4. Hold on, let me go over here and see what's happening. I'm going to come to you guys with some other things in the meantime, in between time. But yeah, I've been kind of busy. But I'm going to come to you with some other topics as well. Let's see here if I can be heard. Yep, I can be heard. All right, so here we go. Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. An Evening in Uncle Tom's Cabin. The cabin of Uncle Tom was a small log building close adjoining to the house, as the Negro par excellence designates his master's dwelling. In front, it had a neat garden patch where, every summer, strawberries, raspberries, and a variety of fruits and vegetables flourished under careful tending. The whole front of it was covered by a large scarlet bignonia and a native multiflora rose, which, in twisting and interlacing, left scarce a vestige of the rough logs to be seen. Here also in summer various brilliant annuals such as marigolds, petunias, 4 o'clocks found an indulgent corner in which to unfold their splendors, and were the delight and pride of Aunt Chloe's heart. Let us enter the dwelling. The evening meal at the house is over, and Aunt Chloe, who presided over its preparations as head cook, has left to inferior officers in the kitchen the business of clearing away and washing dishes, and come out into her own snug territories to get her old man's supper. Therefore, doubt not that it is her you see by the fire, presiding with anxious interest over certain frizzling items in a stew-pan, and anon, with grave consideration, lifting the cover of a bake-kettle, from whence steam forth indubitable intimations of something good. A round, black, shining face is hers, so glossy as to suggest the idea that she might have been washed over with white of eggs, like one of her own tea-rusks. Her whole plump countenance beams with satisfaction and contentment from under her well-starched checked turban, bearing on it, however, if we must confess it, a little of that tinge of self-consciousness which becomes the first cook of the neighborhood, as Aunt Chloe was universally held and acknowledged to be. A cook she certainly was, in the very bone and center of her soul. Not a chicken or turkey or duck in the barnyard but looked grave when they saw her approaching, and seemed evidently to be reflecting on their latter end, and certain it was that she was always meditating on trussing, stuffing, and roasting, to a degree that was calculated to inspire terror in any reflecting fowl living. Her corn cake, in all its varieties of hoe cake, dodgers, muffins, and other species too numerous to mention, was a sublime mystery to all less practiced compounders, and she would shake her fat sides with honest pride and merriment as she would narrate the fruitless efforts that one and another of her compeers had made to attain to her elevation. The arrival of company at the house, the arranging of dinners and suppers in style, awoke all the energies of her soul, and no sight was more welcome to her than a pile of traveling trunks launched on the veranda, for then she foresaw fresh efforts and fresh triumphs. Just at present, however, Aunt Chloe is looking into the bake-pan, in which congenial operation we shall leave her till we finish our picture of the cottage. In one corner of it stood a bed, covered neatly with a snowy spread, and by the side of it was a piece of carpeting of some considerable size. On this piece of carpeting Aunt Chloe took her stand, as being decidedly in the upper walks of life, and it and the bed by which it lay, and the whole corner, in fact, were treated with distinguished consideration, and made, so far as possible, sacred from the marauding inroads and desecrations of little folks. In fact, that corner was the drawing-room of the establishment. In the other corner was a bed of much humbler pretensions, and evidently designed for use. The wall over the fireplace was adorned with some very brilliant scriptural prints, and a portrait of General Washington, drawn and colored in a manner which would certainly have astonished that hero, if ever he happened to meet with its like. On a rough bench in the corner, a couple of woolly-headed boys with glistening black eyes and fat shining cheeks were busy in superintending the first walking operations of the baby, which, as is usually the case, consisted in getting up on its feet, balancing a moment, and then tumbling down, each successive failure being violently cheered as something decidedly clever. A table, somewhat rheumatic in its limbs, was drawn out in front of the fire and covered with a cloth, displaying cups and saucers of a decidedly brilliant pattern, with other symptoms of an approaching meal. At this table was seated Uncle Tom, Mr. Shelby's best hand, who, as he is to be the hero of our story, we must daguerreotype for our readers. He was a large, broad-chested, powerfully made man, of a full, glossy black, and a face whose truly African features were characterized by an expression of grave and steady good sense, united with much kindliness and benevolence. There was something about his whole air self-respecting and dignified, yet united with a confiding and humble simplicity. He was very busy at this moment on a slate lying before him, on which he was carefully and slowly endeavoring to accomplish a copy of some letters, in which operation he was overlooked by young Master George, a smart, bright boy of 13, who appeared fully to realize the dignity of his position as instructor. "Not that way, Uncle Tom, not that way," said he, briskly, as Uncle Tom laboriously brought up the tail of his G the wrong side out. "That makes a Q, you see." "La sakes, now, does it?" said Uncle Tom, looking with a respectful, admiring air as his young teacher flourishingly scrawled Q's and G's innumerable for his edification, and then, taking the pencil in his big, heavy fingers, he patiently recommenced. "How easy white folks allers does things," said Aunt Chloe, pausing while she was greasing a griddle with a scrap of bacon on her fork, and regarding young Master George with pride. "The way he can write now, and read, too, and then to come out here evenings and read his lessons to us. It's mighty interesting." "But, Aunt Chloe, I'm getting mighty hungry," said George. "Isn't that cake in the skillet almost done?" "Most done, Master George," said Aunt Chloe, lifting the lid and peeping in. "Browning beautiful, a real lovely brown. Let me alone for that. Missus let Sally try to make some cake t'other day, just to larn her. She said, 'Oh, go away, missus,' said I. 'It really hurts my feelings now to see good victuals spout that our way. Cake rise all to one side, no shape at all, no more than my shoe, go away.'" And with this final expression of contempt for Sally's greenness, Aunt Chloe whipped the cover off the bake kettle and disclosed to view a neatly baked pound cake, of which no city confectioner need to have been ashamed. This being evidently the central point of the entertainment, Aunt Chloe began now to bustle about earnestly in the supper department. "Here, you Mose and Pete, get out the way, you niggers. Get away, Meriky, honey. Mammy'll give her baby some fin by and by. Now, Massa George, you just take off them books and set down now with my old man, and I'll take up the sausages and have the first griddle full of cakes on your plates in less than no time. They wanted me to come to dinner in the house, said George, but I knew what was what too well for that, Aunt Chloe. So you did, honey, said Aunt Chloe, heaping the smoking batter cakes on his plate. You knowed your old auntie'd keep the best for you. Oh, let you alone for that. Go away. And with that, Auntie gave George a nudge with her finger, designed to be immensely facetious, and turned again to her griddle with great briskness. Now for the cake, said Massa George, when the activity of the griddle department had somewhat subsided, and with that the youngster flourished a large knife over the article in question. La bless you, Mass George, said Aunt Chloe with earnestness, catching his arm. You wouldn't be for cutting it with that ar great heavy knife. Smash all down, spile all the pretty rise of it. Here, I've got a thin old knife I keeps sharp a purpose. Dar now, see? Comes apart light as a feather. Now, eat away. You won't get anything to beat that ar. Tom Lincoln says, said George, speaking with his mouth full, that there Ginny is a better cook than you. Them Lincolns ain't much count, no way, said Aunt Chloe contemptuously. I mean, set alongside our folks. They's 'spectable folks enough in a kinder plain way, but as to getting up anything in style, they don't begin to have a notion on it. Set Master Lincoln, now, alongside Master Shelby. Good Lord! And Mrs. Lincoln, can she kinder sweep it into a room like my missus, so kinder splendid, you know. Oh, go away. Don't tell me nothing of them Lincolns. And Aunt Chloe tossed her head as one who hoped she did know something of the world. Well, though, I've heard you say, said George, that Ginny was a pretty fair cook. So I did, said Aunt Chloe. I may say that. Good, plain, common cooking. Ginny'll do. Make a good pone of bread. Bile her taters far. Her corn cakes isn't extra, not extra now. Ginny's corn cakes isn't, but then they's fire. But, lor, come to be hired branches, and what can she do? Why, she makes pies. Sartin she does. But what kind of crust? Can she make your real flecky paste as melts in your mouth and lies all up like a puff? Now, I went over thar when Miss Mary was going to be married, and Ginny, she just showed me the wedding pies. Ginny and I is good friends, you know. I never said nothing. But go long, Master George. Why, I shouldn't sleep a wink for a week if I had a batch of pies like them are. Why, they want no count tall. I suppose Ginny thought they were ever so nice, said George. Thought so, didn't she? Thar she was, showing 'em as innocent. You see, it's just here. Ginny don't know. Lor, the family ain't nothing. She can't be 'spected to know. 'Tan't no fault of 'em. Oh, Master George, you doesn't know half your privileges in your family in bringing up. Here Aunt Chloe sighed and rolled up her eyes with emotion. I'm sure, Aunt Chloe, I understand. My pie and pudding privileges, said George. Ask Tom Lincoln if I don't crow over him every time I meet him. Aunt Chloe sat back in her chair and indulged in a hearty guffaw of laughter at this witticism of young Masser's, laughing till the tears rolled down her black, shining cheeks, and varying the exercise with playfully slapping and poking Master Georgie, and telling him to go away, and that he was a case, that he was fit to kill her, and that he sartin would kill her one of these days, and between each of these sanguinary predictions going off into a laugh, each longer and stronger than the other, till George really began to think that he was a very dangerously witty fellow, and that it became him to be careful how he talked, as funny as he could. And so you yelled, Tom, did you? Oh, Lord, what young'uns will be up to? You crowed over Tom? Oh, Lord, Master George, if you wouldn't make a horned bug laugh. Yes, said George, I says to him, Tom, you ought to see some of Aunt Chloe's pies. They're the right sort, says I. Pity now Tom couldn't, said Aunt Chloe, on whose benevolent heart the idea of Tom's benighted condition seemed to make a strong impression. You ought to just ask him here to dinner some of these times, Master George, she added. It would look quite pretty of you. You know, Master George, you oughtn't to feel above nobody on account your privileges, 'cause all our privileges is given to us. We ought allus to remember that, said Aunt Chloe, looking quite serious. Well, I mean to ask Tom here some day next week, said George, and you do your prettiest, Aunt Chloe, and we'll make him stare. Won't we make him eat so he won't get over it for a fortnight?" "Yes, yes, certain," said Uncle Chloe, delighted. "You'll see, Lord, to think of some of our dinners. You mind that our great chicken pie made when we go to dinner to General Knox? I and Mrs., we come pretty near quarreling about that our crust. What does get into ladies sometimes, I don't know. But sometimes, when a body has the heaviest kind of 'sponsibility on 'em, as ye may say, and is all kinder serious and taken up, they takes that our time to be hanging round and kinder interfering. Now, Mrs., she wanted me to do this way, and she wanted me to do that way, and finally I got kinder sarcy and says, 'Now, Mrs., do just look at them beautiful white hands of yourn with long fingers and all them sparkly with rings, like my white lilies when the dew's on 'em, and look at my great black stumpin' hands. Now, don't you think that the Lord must have meant me to make the pie crust, and you to stay in the parlor?'"
For those who just joined us, welcome. We are listening to chapter 4 of Uncle Tom's Cabin. And I put some things in the box because um, when we looked earlier at the overview of Uncle Tom's Cabin, the thought was that many of the stereotypes that later on continue to travel through time were born with this narrative. And so the description, and I could be wrong, but the description that they're making of Aunt Chloe is this description of the mammy, and the mammy was one of those thought processes that were birthed from this narrative. So listen intently to this description of Uncle Tom's wife and what she's concerned with, and how she's appeasing the young master, and how she's jesting with him, and how she's in competition with other women who are cooking at other plantations. So just keep that in mind. I just want to stop and welcome everybody for joining us, and that's kind of what's going on here. This back and forth banter about whose biscuits are the best, because in this space, it was one of the only things that the women couldn't necessarily pride themselves on, who could knit the best or who could cook the best, and you know what I mean. And so that was something that was kind of like a back and forth. But I'll go ahead and press play. We have, well, let me see how many more minutes we have on chapter 4. We'll see how much we have, and probably go on to chapter 5 with 112. Yeah, we have another 14 minutes.
"I was just so sarcy, Master George." "And what did Mother say?" said George. "Say? Why, she kinder larfed in her eyes, them great handsome eyes of hern. Oh, and says she, 'Well, Aunt Chloe, I think you are about in the right on't,' says she, and she went off into parlor. She ought to cracked me over the head for being so sarcy, but thar's whar 'tis. I can't do nothing with ladies in the kitchen." "Well, you made out well with that dinner. I remember everybody said so," said George. "Didn't I? And wa'n't I behind the dining-room door dat berry day? And didn't I see the General pass his plate 3 times for some more dat berry pie? And says he, 'You must have an uncommon cook, Mrs. Shelby.' Lord, I was fit to split myself. And the General, he knows what cooking is," said Aunt Chloe, drawing herself up with an air. "Berry nice man, the General. He comes of one of the berry fustest families in old Virginny. He knows what's what now, as well as I do, the General. You see, there's p'ints in all pies, Master George, but 'tain't everybody knows what they is, or as orter be. But the General, he knows. I knew by his marks he made. Yes, he knows what the p'ints is." By this time Master George had arrived at that pass to which even a boy can come under uncommon circumstances when he really could not eat another morsel, and, therefore, he was at leisure to notice the pile of woolly heads and glistening eyes which were regarding their operations hungrily from the opposite corner. "Here, you, Mose, Pete," he said, breaking off liberal bits and throwing it at them. "You want some, don't you? Come, Aunt Chloe, bake them some cakes." And George and Tom moved to a comfortable seat in the chimney corner, while Aunt Chloe, after baking a goodly pile of cakes, took her baby on her lap and began alternately filling its mouth and her own, and distributing to Mose and Pete, who seemed rather to prefer eating theirs as they rolled about on the floor under the table, tickling each other and occasionally pulling the baby's toes. "Oh, go 'long, will you?" said the mother, giving now and then a kick in a kind of a general way under the table when the movement became too obstreperous. "Can't you be decent when white folks comes to see you? Stop that ar, now, will you? Better mind yourselves, or I'll take you down a buttonhole lower when Massa George is gone." What meaning was couched under this terrible threat, it is difficult to say, but certain it is that its awful indistinctness seemed to produce very little impression on the young sinners addressed. "Law, now," said Uncle Tom, "they are so full of tickle all the while. They can't behave theirselves." Here the boys emerged from under the table, and with hands and faces well plastered with molasses, began a vigorous kissing of the baby. "Get along with you," said the mother, pushing away their woolly heads. "You'll all stick together and never get clar if you do that fashion. Go along to spring and wash yourselves," she said, seconding her exhortations with a slap which resounded very formidably, but which seemed only to knock out so much more laugh from the young ones as they tumbled precipitately over each other out the doors, where they fairly screamed with merriment. "Did you ever see such aggravating young'uns?" said Aunt Chloe, rather complacently, as, producing an old towel kept for such emergencies, she poured a little water out of the cracked teapot on it and began rubbing off the molasses from the baby's face and hands. And, having polished her till she shone, she set her down in Tom's lap, while she busied herself in clearing away supper. The baby employed the intervals in pulling Tom's nose, scratching his face, and burying her fat hands in his woolly hair, which last operation seemed to afford her special content. "Ain't she a pert young'un?" said Tom, holding her from him to take a full-length view. Then, getting up, he set her on his broad shoulder and began capering and dancing with her, while Master George snapped at her with his pocket-handkerchief, and Mose and Pete, now returned again, roared after her like bears, till Aunt Chloe declared that they fairly took her head off with their noise. As, according to her own statement, this surgical operation was a matter of daily occurrence in the cabin, the declaration no whit abated the merriment, till every one had roared and tumbled and danced themselves down to a state of composure. "Well, now, I hopes you're done," said Aunt Chloe, who had been busy in pulling out a rude box of a trundle bed, "and now you and Mose and Pete get into thar, for we's going to have the meetin'." "Oh, Mother, we don't want her. We wants to sit up to meetin'. Meetin' is so cur'ous. We likes 'em." "La, Aunt Chloe, shove it under and let 'em sit up," said Master George decisively, giving a push to the rude machine. Aunt Chloe, having thus saved appearances, seemed highly delighted to push the thing under, saying as she did so, "Well, maybe 'twill do 'em some good." The House now resolved itself into a committee of the whole to consider the accommodations and arrangements for the meeting. "What we's to do for cheers now, I declare I don't know," said Aunt Chloe. As the meeting had been held at Uncle Tom's weekly for an indefinite length of time, without any more cheers, there seemed some encouragement to hope that a way would be discovered at present. "Old Uncle Peter sung both the legs out of that oldest cheer last week," suggested Mose. "You go long. I'll bound you pulled 'em out. Some of your shines," said Aunt Chloe. "Well, it'll stand, if it's only keeps jam up against the wall," said Mose. "Then Uncle Peter mustn't sit in it, 'cause he allus hitches when he gets a singin'. He hitched pretty nigh across the room t'other night," said Pete. "Good Lord, get him in it, then," said Mose. "And then he'd begin, 'Come, saints and sinners, hear me tell,' and then down he'd go." And Mose imitated precisely the nasal tones of the old man tumbling on the floor to illustrate the supposed catastrophe. "Come now, be decent, can't you?" said Aunt Chloe. "Ain't you ashamed?" Master George, however, joined the offender in the laugh, and declared decidedly that Mose was a buster, so the maternal admonition seemed rather to fail of effect. "Well, old man," said Aunt Chloe, "you'll have to tote in them our barrels." "Mother's barrels is like that our widders Master George was reading about in the good book. They never fails," said Mose aside to Peter. "I'm sure one of them caved in last week," said Pete, "and let 'em all down in the middle o' that singing. That ar was failing, warn't it?" During this aside between Mose and Pete, 2 empty casks had been rolled into the cabin, and being secured from rolling by stones on each side, boards were laid across them, which arrangement, together with the turning down of certain tubs and pails, and the disposing of the rickety chairs, at last completed the preparation. "Master George is such a beautiful reader now, I know he'll stay to read for us," said Aunt Chloe. "'Pears like 'twill be so much more interesting." George very readily consented, for your boy is always ready for anything that makes him of importance. The room was soon filled with a motley assemblage, from the old gray-headed patriarch of 80 to the young girl and lad of 15. A little harmless gossip ensued on various themes, such as where old Aunt Sally got her new red handkerchief, and how Mrs. was going to give Lizzie that spotted muslin gown when she got her new barrage made up, and how Massa Shelby was thinking of buying a new sorrel colt that was going to prove an addition to the glories of the place. A few of the worshippers belonged to families hard by who had got permission to attend, and who brought in various choice scraps of information about the sayings and doings at the house and on the place, which circulated as freely as the same sort of small change does in higher circles. After a while the singing commenced, to the evident delight of all present. Not even all the disadvantage of nasal intonation could prevent the effect of the naturally fine voices in airs at once wild and spirited. The words were sometimes the well-known and common hymns sung in the churches about, and sometimes of a wilder, more indefinite character, picked up at camp meetings. The chorus of one of them, which ran as follows, was sung with great energy and unction. Die on the field of battle, die on the field of battle, glory in my soul. Another special favorite had oft repeated the words, Oh, I'm going to glory, won't you come along with me? Don't you see the angels beckoning and calling me away? Don't you see the golden city and the everlasting day? There were others which made incessant mention of Jordan's banks and Canaan's fields and the New Jerusalem, for the Negro mind, impassioned and imaginative, always attaches itself to hymns and expressions of a vivid and pictorial nature. And as they sung, some laughed and some cried, and some clapped hands or shook hands rejoicingly with each other, as if they had fairly gained the other side of the river. Various exhortations or relations of experience followed and intermingled with the singing. One old gray-headed woman, long past work, but much revered as a sort of chronicle of the past, rose, and leaning on her staff, said, Well, children, well, I'm mighty glad to hear y'all and see y'all once more, 'cause I don't know when I'll be gone to glory, but I've done got ready, children. 'Pears like I'd got my little bundle all tied up and my bonnet on, just a-waiting for the stage to come along and take me home. Sometimes in the night I think I hear the wheels a-rattling, and I'm looking out all the time. Now you just be ready, too, for I tell you all, children," she said, striking her staff hard on the floor, "dat our glory is a mighty thing. It's a mighty thing, children. You don't know nothing about it. It's wonderful." And the old creature sat down with streaming tears, as wholly overcome, while the whole circle struck up, "Oh, Canaan, bright Canaan, I'm bound for the land of Canaan." Massa George, by request, read the last chapters of Revelation, often interrupted by such exclamations as, "The sakes now! Only hear that! Just think on't! Is all that a-comin' sure enough?" George, who was a bright boy and well trained in religious things by his mother, finding himself an object of general admiration, threw in expositions of his own from time to time, with a commendable seriousness and gravity, for which he was admired by the young and blessed by the old, and it was agreed on all hands that a minister couldn't lay it off better than he did. That 'twas really 'mazin'. Uncle Tom was a sort of patriarch in religious matters in the neighborhood, having naturally an organization in which the morale was strongly predominant, together with a greater breadth and cultivation of mind than obtained among his companions. He was looked up to with great respect as a sort of minister among them, and the simple, hearty, sincere style of his exhortations might have edified even better educated persons, but it was in prayer that he especially excelled. Nothing could exceed the touching simplicity, the childlike earnestness of his prayer, enriched with the language of Scripture, which seemed so entirely to have wrought itself into his being as to have become a part of himself, and to drop from his lips unconsciously. In the language of a pious old Negro, he prayed right up, and so much did his prayer always work on the devotional feelings of his audiences that there seemed often a danger that it would be lost altogether in the abundance of the responses which broke out everywhere around him. While this scene was passing in the cabin of the man, one quite otherwise passed in the halls of the master. The trader and Mr. Shelby were seated together in the dining room aforenamed, at a table covered with papers and writing utensils. Mr. Shelby was busy in counting some bundles of bills, which, as they were counted, he pushed over to the trader, who counted them likewise. "All fair," said the trader, "and now for signing these ere." Mr. Shelby hastily drew the bills of sale toward him, and signed them, like a man that hurries over some disagreeable business, and then pushed them over with the money. Haley produced from a well-worn valise a parchment, which, after looking over it a moment, he handed to Mr. Shelby, who took it with a gesture of suppressed eagerness. "Well, now, the thing's done," said the trader, getting up. "It's done," said Mr. Shelby, in a musing tone, and fetching a long breath, repeated, "It's done." "You don't seem to feel much pleased with it, 'pears to me," said the trader. "Haley," said Mr. Shelby, "I hope you'll remember that you promised on your honor you wouldn't sell Tom without knowing what sort of hands he's going into." "Why, you's just done it, sir," said the trader. "Circumstances, you well know, obliged me," said Shelby haughtily. "Well, you know, they may oblige me, too," said the trader. "Howsomever, I'll do the very best I can in getting Tom a good berth. As to my treating on him bad, you needn't be a grain feared. If there's anything that I thank the Lord for, it is that I'm never no ways cruel." After the expositions which the trader had previously given of his humane principles, Mr. Shelby did not feel particularly reassured by these declarations, but as they were the best comfort the case admitted of, he allowed the trader to depart in silence, and betook himself to a solitary cigar. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5.
Woo! Whoa. That was a lot. She was really wordy. Her words were extracurricular on that chapter. But that was chapter 4. Let me know what you guys thought. You guys were kind of quiet on that chapter. She was going into a lot of descriptive terminology. Um, I noticed, and it's not just this one, the way in which they referenced melanated people, even though she was an abolitionist, right? So this is the mind of an abolitionist who's writing this, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and yet the terms are still referencing people as though they're not people, you know, creature and, all this type of language, black, big, shiny hands, and all is very, very descriptive, and not necessarily in a good way, in the way in which they're making it sound, except for when someone may be mixed with what they feel is uh, good genes, aka mixed with European. So when they described the young quadroon boy, it was totally different. When they described Eliza, it was totally different. And so this is kind of what we see today, even spilling over into colorism and this whole conversation about um, what is good here. You notice that they keep drawing attention to woolly hair, like there was nothing else you could. It could be rambunctious boys, spirited boys, something of that nature. But it has to go to big eyes and woolly hair. Like these are the descriptive terms that, for whatever reason, stood out in their mind. So basically, as we heard, they're in Uncle Tom's cabin. Uncle Tom has no idea about what's about to pop off. um, his wife is being described as the mammy of the plantation. Her head is in another totally different direction. They're making sure to notice that she's big and have big fat fingers, which I guess indicates that she's eating. Okay, so she has no reason at this particular time to have any beef about what's going on. And they started having church. Uncle Tom is learning to read a bit, and now the people came in and they were having church, all while Shelby is over there signing Tom away. And so that's where we are. And so let's listen to chapter. Let me see if I could. I talked about the descriptive words. Why was his mother kicking him under the table and forcing him to act proper when there were, quote, white folks around? I thought that was also interesting. About these two types of behaviors, or two faces, or two masks. One when Europeans, or in the presence of Europeans, and one when you're amongst your own. And his singing was everything. I thought his singing. And then just to revisit the conversation I had about the parallels between that were happening in slavery with this Israelite thought or Hebraic thought. We see it in this chapter as well, that they make references to Canaan and Jordan, and it was really this fixation on death. All right, Deep Mind Unravel said if you need a reader, I can help as well. All right, now, thank you for volunteering to be a reader. Definitely, we're gonna listen. Don't okay. Hit me up on the email and we can coordinate. I haven't done a hangout. I have to find out how to bring people in on the chat right now. This round, I've just given myself a break and let the recording read. But definitely hit my email and then we'll see how to coordinate a time if you would like to come in and read a chapter. That'll be good. That'll be good. Thank you so much. Cause he's funny. he was not singing that church song in no way. He was like, "Oh joy." I thought that was funny, but that may just be me. But we're gonna go ahead to chapter 5 now.
5, showing the feelings of living property on changing owners. Mr. and Mrs. Shelby had retired to their apartment for the night. He was lounging in a large easy-chair looking over some letters that had come in the afternoon mail, and she was standing before her mirror brushing out the complicated braids and curls in which Eliza had arranged her hair. For noticing her pale cheeks and haggard eyes, she had excused her attendance that night and ordered her to bed. The employment, naturally enough, suggested her conversation with the girl in the morning, and turning to her husband, she said carelessly, "By the by, Arthur, who was that low-bred fellow that you lugged in to our dinner table today?" "Haley is his name," said Shelby, turning himself rather uneasily in his chair and continuing with his eyes fixed on a letter. "Haley? Who is he, and what may be his business here, pray?" "Well, he's a man that I transacted some business with last time I was at Natchez," said Mr. Shelby. "And he presumed on it to make himself quite at home and call and dine here, eh?" "Why, I invited him. I had some accounts with him," said Shelby. "Is he a Negro trader?" said Mrs. Shelby, noticing a certain embarrassment in her husband's manner. "Why, my dear, what put that into your head?" said Shelby, looking up. "Nothing, only Eliza came in here after dinner in a great worry, crying and taking on, and said you were talking with a trader, and that she heard him make an offer for her boy, the ridiculous little goose." "She did, eh?" said Mr. Shelby, returning to his paper, which he seemed for a few moments quite intent upon, not perceiving that he was holding it bottom upwards. "It will have to come out," said he mentally, "as well now as ever." "I told Eliza," said Mrs. Shelby, as she continued brushing her hair, "that she was a little fool for her pains, and that you never had anything to do with that sort of persons. Of course, I knew you never meant to sell any of our people, least of all to such a fellow." "Well, Emily," said her husband, "so I have always felt and said, but the fact is that my business lies so that I cannot get on without. I shall have to sell some of my hands." "To that creature? Impossible! Mr. Shelby, you cannot be serious." "I'm sorry to say that I am," said Mr. Shelby. "I've agreed to sell Tom." "What? Our Tom? That good, faithful creature? Been your faithful servant from a boy. Oh, Mr. Shelby, and you have promised him his freedom, too. You and I have spoken to him 100 times of it. Well, I can believe anything now. I can believe now that you could sell little Harry, poor Eliza's only child," said Mrs. Shelby in a tone between grief and indignation. "Well, since you must know all, it is so. I have agreed to sell Tom and Harry both, and I don't know why I am to be rated as if I were a monster for doing what everyone does every day." "But why, of all others, choose these?" said Mrs. Shelby. "Why sell them, of all on the place, if you must sell it all?" "Because they will bring the highest sum of any. That's why. I could choose another, if you say so. The fellow made me a high bid on Eliza, if that would suit you any better," said Mr. Shelby. "The wretch!" said Mrs. Shelby vehemently. "Well, I didn't listen to it a moment. Out of regard to your feelings, I wouldn't. So give me some credit." "My dear," said Mrs. Shelby, recollecting herself, "forgive me. I have been hasty. I was surprised and entirely unprepared for this, but surely you will allow me to intercede for these poor creatures. Tom is a noble-hearted, faithful fellow, if he is black. I do believe, Mr. Shelby, that if he were put to it, he would lay down his life for you." "I know it, I dare say. But what's the use of all this? I can't help myself. Why not make a pecuniary sacrifice? I'm willing to bear my part of the inconvenience. Oh, Mr. Shelby, I have tried most faithfully as a Christian woman should, to do my duty to these poor, simple, dependent creatures. I have cared for them, instructed them, watched over them, and know all their little cares and joys for years. And how can I ever hold up my head again among them, if, for the sake of a little paltry gain, we sell such a faithful, excellent, confiding creature as poor Tom, and tear from him in a moment all we have taught him to love and value? I have taught them the duties of the family, of parent and child, and husband and wife, and how can I bear to have this open acknowledgment that we care for no tie, no duty, no relation, however sacred, compared with money? I have talked with Eliza about her boy, her duty to him as a Christian mother, to watch over him, pray for him, and bring him up in a Christian way. And now what can I say if you tear him away and sell him, soul and body, to a profane, unprincipled man, just to save a little money? I have told her that one soul is worth more than all the money in the world. And how will she believe me when she sees us turn round and sell her child? Sell him, perhaps, to certain ruin of body and soul. I'm sorry you feel so about it. Indeed I am, said Mr. Shelby. And I respect your feelings, too, though I don't pretend to share them to their full extent. But I tell you now, solemnly, it's of no use. I can't help myself. I didn't mean to tell you this, Emily, but in plain words, there is no choice between selling these two and selling everything. Either they must go, or all must. Haley has come into possession of a mortgage, which, if I don't clear off with him directly, will take everything before it. I've raked and scraped and borrowed, and all but begged, and the price of these two was needed to make up the balance, and I had to give them up. Haley fancied the child. He agreed to settle the matter that way, and no other. I was in his power, and had to do it. If you feel so to have them sold, would it be any better to have all sold? Mrs. Shelby stood like one stricken. Finally, turning to her toilette, she rested her face in her hands and gave a sort of groan. This is God's curse on slavery, a bitter, bitter, most accursed thing, a curse to the master and a curse to the slave. I was a fool to think I could make anything good out of such a deadly evil. It is a sin to hold a slave under laws like ours. I always felt it was. I always thought so when I was a girl. I thought so still more after I joined the church. But I thought I could gild it over. I thought by kindness and care and instruction I could make the condition of mine better than freedom. Fool that I was. Why, wife, you are getting to be an abolitionist, quite. Abolitionist? If they knew all I know about slavery, they might talk. We don't need them to tell us. You know I never thought that slavery was right, never felt willing to own slaves. Well, therein you differ from many wise and pious men, said Mr. Shelby. You remember Mr. B.'s sermon the other Sunday? I don't want to hear such sermons. I never wish to hear Mr. B. in our church again. Ministers can't help the evil, perhaps, can't cure it any more than we can, but defend it? It always went against my common sense, and I think you didn't think much of that sermon either. Well, said Shelby, I must say these ministers sometimes carry matters further than we poor sinners would exactly dare to do. We men of the world must wink pretty hard at various things and get used to a deal that isn't the exact thing. But we don't quite fancy when women and ministers come out broad and square and go beyond us in matters of either modesty or morals. That's a fact. But now, my dear, I trust you see the necessity of the thing, and you see that I have done the very best that circumstances would allow. Oh, yes, yes, said Mrs. Shelby, hurriedly and abstractedly fingering her gold watch. I haven't any jewelry of any amount, she added thoughtfully. But would not this watch do something? It was an expensive one when it was bought. If I could only at least save Eliza's child, I would sacrifice anything I have. I'm sorry, very sorry, Emily, said Mr. Shelby. I'm sorry this takes hold of you so, but it will do no good. The fact is, Emily, the thing's done. The bills of sale are already signed. and in Haley's hands, and you must be thankful it is no worse. That man has had it in his power to ruin us all, and now he is fairly off. If you knew the man as I do, you'd think that we had had a narrow escape." "Is he so hard, then?" "Why, not a cruel man exactly, but a man of leather, a man alive to nothing but trade and profit, cool and unhesitating and unrelenting as death and the grave. He'd sell his own mother at a good percentage, not wishing the old woman any harm either." "And this wretch owns that good, faithful Tom and Eliza's child?" "Well, my dear, the fact is that this goes rather hard with me. It's a thing I hate to think of. Haley wants to drive matters and take possession tomorrow. I'm going to get out my horse bright and early and be off. I can't see Tom, that's a fact, and you had better arrange a drive somewhere and carry Eliza off. Let the thing be done when she is out of sight." "No, no," said Mrs. Shelby. "I'll be in no sense accomplice or help in this cruel business. I'll go and see poor old Tom, God help him, in his distress. They shall see at any rate that their mistress can feel for and with them. As to Eliza, I dare not think about it. The Lord forgive us. What have we done that this cruel necessity should come on us?" There was one listener to this conversation whom Mr. and Mrs. Shelby little suspected. Communicating with their apartment was a large closet, opening by a door into an outer passage. When Mrs. Shelby had dismissed Eliza for the night, her feverish and excited mind had suggested the idea of his closet, and she had hidden herself there, and with her ear pressed close against the crack of the door, had lost not a word of the conversation. When the voices died into silence, she rose and crept stealthily away. Pale, shivering, with rigid features and compressed lips, she looked an entirely altered being from the soft and timid creature she had been hitherto. She moved cautiously along the entry, paused one moment at her mistress's door, and raised her hands in mute appeal to heaven, and then turned and glided into her own room. It was a quiet, neat apartment on the same floor with her mistress. There was a pleasant, sunny window where she had often sat singing at her sewing. There a little case of books and various little fancy articles, ranged by them, the gifts of Christmas holidays. There was her simple wardrobe in the closet and in the drawers. Here was, in short, her home, and on the whole, a happy one it had been to her. But there, on the bed, lay her slumbering boy, his long curls falling negligently around his unconscious face, his rosy mouth half open, his little fat hands thrown out over the bedclothes, and a smile spread like a sunbeam over his whole face. "Poor boy, poor fellow," said Eliza. "They have sold you, but your mother will save you yet." No tear dropped over that pillow. In such straits as these, the heart has no tears to give. It drops only blood, bleeding itself away in silence. She took a piece of paper and a pencil and wrote hastily, "Oh, Mrs., dear Mrs., don't think me ungrateful. Don't think hard of me, anyway. I heard all you and Master said tonight. I'm going to try to save my boy. You will not blame me. God bless and reward you for all your kindness." Hastily folding and directing this, she went to a drawer and made up a little package of clothing for her boy, which she tied with a handkerchief firmly around her waist. And so fond is a mother's remembrance that even in the terrors of that hour she did not forget to put in the little package one or two of his favorite toys, reserving a gaily painted parrot to amuse him when she should be called on to awaken him. It was some trouble to arouse the little sleeper, but after some effort he sat up and was playing with his bird, while his mother was putting on her bonnet and shawl. "Where are you going, Mother?" said he, as she drew near the bed with his little coat and cap. His mother drew near, and looked so earnestly into his eyes that he at once divined that something unusual was the matter. "Hush, Harry," she said. "Mustn't speak loud, or they will hear us. A wicked man was coming to take little Harry away from his mother and carry him way off in the dark, but Mother won't let him. She's going to put on her little boy's cap and coat and run off with him so the ugly man can't catch him." Saying these words, she had tied and buttoned on the child's simple outfit, and, taking him in her arms, she whispered to him to be very still, and, opening a door in her room which led into the outer veranda, she glided noiselessly out. It was a sparkling, frosty, starlight night, and the mother wrapped the shawl close around her child, as perfectly quiet with vague terror he clung round her neck. Old Bruno, a great Newfoundland, who slept at the end of the porch, rose with a low growl as she came near. She gently spoke his name, and the animal, an old pet and playmate of hers, instantly wagging his tail, prepared to follow her, though apparently revolving much, in this simple dog's head, what such an indiscreet midnight promenade might mean. Some dim ideas of imprudence or impropriety in the measure seemed to embarrass him considerably, for he often stopped as Eliza glided forward, and looked wistfully, first at her and then at the house, and then, as if reassured by reflection, he pattered along after her again. A few minutes brought them to the window of Uncle Tom's cottage, and Eliza, stopping, tapped lightly on the window-pane. The prayer meeting at Uncle Tom's had, in the order of hymn-singing, been protracted to a very late hour, and, as Uncle Tom had indulged himself in a few lengthy solos afterwards, the consequence was that, although it was now between 12 and 1 o'clock, he and his worthy helpmeet were not yet asleep.
"Good Lord, what's that?"
said Aunt Chloe, starting up and hastily drawing the curtain.
"My sakes alive, if it ain't Lizzie! Get on your clothes, old man, quick! There's old Bruno, too, a-pawing around. What on earth? I'm going to open the door."
And suiting the action to the word, the door flew open, and the light of the tallow candle, which Tom had hastily lighted, fell on the haggard face and dark, wild eyes of the fugitive.
"Lord bless you, I'm scared to look at you, Lizzie. Are you tuck sick, or what's come over you?"
"I'm running away, Uncle Tom and Aunt Chloe, carrying off my child. Master sold him."
"Sold him?"
echoed both, lifting up their hands in dismay.
"Yes, sold him," said Eliza firmly. "I crept into the closet by Mistress's door tonight, and I heard Master tell Missus that he had sold my Harry, and you, Uncle Tom, both, to a trader, and that he was going off this morning on his horse, and that the man was to take possession today."
Tom had stood, during this speech, with his hands raised, and his eyes dilated like a man in a dream. Slowly and gradually, as its meaning came over him, he collapsed rather than seated himself on his old chair, and sunk his head down upon his knees.
"The good Lord have pity on us," said Aunt Chloe. "Oh, it don't seem as if it was true. But what has he done that Master should sell him?"
"He hasn't done anything. It isn't for that. Master don't want to sell, and Missus, she's always good. I heard her plead and beg for us, but he told her it was no use, that he was in this man's debt, and that this man had got the power over him, and that if he didn't pay him off clear, it would end in his having to sell the place and all the people and move off. Yes, I heard him say there was no choice between selling these two and selling all. The man was driving him so hard. Master said he was sorry, but, oh, Mrs., you ought to have heard her talk. If she ain't a Christian and an angel, there never was one. I'm a wicked girl to leave her so, but then I can't help it. She said herself one soul was worth more than the world, and this boy has a soul, and if I let him be carried off, who knows what'll become of it. It must be right, but if it ain't right, the Lord forgive me, for I can't help doing it."
"Well, old man," said Aunt Chloe, "why don't you go too? Will you wait to be toted down the river where they kill niggers with hard work and starving? I'd a heap rather die than go there any day. There's time for you. Be off with Lizzie. You've got a pass to come and go any time. Come, bustle up, and I'll get your things together."
Tom slowly raised his head and looked sorrowfully but quietly around and said, No, I ain't going. Let Eliza go, it's her right. I wouldn't be the one to say no. 'Tain't in nater for her to stay. But you heard what she said. If I must be sold, or all the people on the place and everything go to wreck, why, let me be sold. I suppose I can bar it as well as any of them," he added, while something like a sob and a sigh shook his broad, rough chest convulsively. "Master always found me on the spot. He always will. I never have broke trust, nor used my past no ways contrary to my word, and I never will. It's better for me alone to go than to break up the place and sell all. Master ain't to blame, Chloe, and he'll take care of you and the poor—" Here he turned to the rough trundle bed full of little woolly heads and broke fairly down. He leaned over the back of the chair and covered his face with his large hands. Sobs, heavy, hoarse, and loud, shook the chair, and great tears fell through his fingers on the floor.
Just such tears, sir, as you dropped into the coffin where lay your firstborn son. Such tears, woman, as you shed when you heard the cries of your dying babe. For, sir, he was a man, and you are but another man. And woman, though dressed in silk and jewels, you are but a woman, and in life's great straits and mighty griefs, ye feel but one sorrow.
And now, said Eliza, as she stood in the door, I saw my husband only this afternoon, and I little knew then what was to come. They have pushed him to the very last standing place, and he told me today that he was going to run away. Do try, if you can, to get word to him. Tell him how I went and why I went, and tell him I'm going to try and find Canada. You must give my love to him, and tell him if I never see him again.
She turned away and stood with her back to them for a moment, and then added in a husky voice,
Tell him to be as good as he can, and try and meet me in the kingdom of heaven. Call Bruno in there, she added. Shut the door on him, poor beast. He mustn't go with me.
A few last words and tears, a few simple adieus and blessings, and clasping her wondering and affrighted child in her arms, she glided noiselessly away. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Discovery. Mr. and
Wait a
Mrs.
minute, wait a minute,
Shelby,
wait a
after
minute. For those who've just joined us, welcome to the discussion. It's getting hot, y'all. I might just play chapter 6 because I'm rested up today. For those, let me know if you want me to play chapter 6. Put it in the chat. Chapter 6 is about to get lit, so I don't know if you guys are ready. But if you want me to play chapter 6, I will play chapter 6. For those who just joined us, we are listening to Uncle Tom's Cabin. This is a stereotype that, still how many hundreds of years later, you're acting like an Uncle Tom. And a lot of people don't know the story of Uncle Tom or never read the story of Uncle Tom. So far, we're on chapter 5. We just finished chapter 5. Eliza, she's like, yo, she was eavesdropping in the closet. She heard what was going down. She's like, forget it, I'm out. You know what I'm saying? I'm out. But she still has that kind of cognitive dissonance going on. She still has that trauma bond to the slave master that's going on. And so she sounds like a little bit like she's caping for her. I'm like, yo, Eliza, why are you writing homegirl the note? You know what I'm saying? Why are you tipping people off? But nonetheless, so we see that kind of conversation. And in real life, a lot of narratives where there were many melanated people. Some people call it Stockholm's, but it's this trauma bond. There's many melanated people who had this affinity towards the quote nicer slave masters. And so she's trying to make sense of, and so is Tom. Tom is standing there like, I was down for this dude. I never left. I never cheated. I never robbed. And why is he selling me? And, his wife, which would be like the mammy character in this discussion, which is Aunt Chloe, she's like, yo, forget that town. I'll pack you up. You know what I'm saying? You could go. I thought that was interesting because she was doing the most when the little Euro little master was there. And now nobody's there. She's like, all right, Tom, we gotta get you out of here. And Tom is like, no, I'm not going anywhere. And I think, that's deep. He's like, because if I do, they're gonna come for many other people's. So, okay, I got a few yeses here. So let's go ahead then. Let me see if I missed anything. And again, if you're new to the discussion, we're doing it together because it's a heavy topic. And if we, do it together and have discussions and kind of work our way through, then we can kind of process it together because just ignoring the history doesn't make it go away. So Shelby, the wife, she's over there crying. He's like, ain't nothing you could do, so you could have a seat. Eliza's on the run. Tom is going to take the hit. And Chloe, she was ready for her man to go. Let's get the likes and the thumbs up. That's right. So that, it can get to more people so we can have this discussion. But since I'm in the mood today, let's go ahead and get into chapter 6, shall we? Chapter 6.
their protracted discussion of the night before, did not readily sink to repose, and in consequence slept somewhat later than usual the ensuing morning. "I wonder what keeps Eliza," said Mrs. Shelby, after giving her bell repeated pulls to no purpose. Mr. Shelby was standing before his dressing-glass, sharpening his razor, and just then the door opened, and a colored boy entered with his shaving-water. "Andy," said his mistress, "step to Eliza's door and tell her I have run for her 3 times. Poor thing," she added to herself with a sigh.
Andy soon returned, with eyes very wide in astonishment.
"Lor, missus, Lizzie's drawers all open and her things all lying every which way, and I believe she's done cleared out."
The truth flashed upon Mr. Shelby and his wife at the same moment. He exclaimed, "Then she suspected it, and she's off."
"The Lord be thanked," said Mrs. Shelby. "I trust she is."
"Wife, you talk like a fool. Really, it will be something pretty awkward for me if she is. Haley saw that I hesitated about selling this child, and he'll think I connived at it to get him out of the way. It touches my honor." And Mr. Shelby left the room hastily. There was great running and ejaculating and opening and shutting of doors and appearance of faces in all shades of color in different places for about a quarter of an hour. One person only, who might have shed some light on the matter, was entirely silent, and that was the head cook, Aunt Chloe. Silently, and with a heavy cloud settled down over her once joyous face, she proceeded making out her breakfast biscuits, as if she heard and saw nothing of the excitement around her. Very soon about a dozen young imps were roosting like so many crows on the veranda railings, each one determined to be the first one to apprise the strange master of his ill luck.
"He'll be raal mad, I'll be bound," said Andy.
"Won't he swar?" said little black Jake.
"Yes, for he does swar," said woolly-headed Mandy, "and I hearn him yesterday at dinner. I hearn him all about it, 'cause I got it into the closet where Missus keeps the great jugs, and I hearn every word."
And Mandy, who had never in her life thought of the meaning of a word she had heard more than a black cat, now took airs of superior wisdom and strutted about, forgetting to state that, though actually coiled up among the jugs at the time specified, she had been fast asleep all the time. When, at last, Haley appeared, hooted and spurred, he was saluted with the bad tidings on every hand. The young imps on the veranda were not disappointed in their hope of hearing him swar, which he did with a fluency and fervency which delighted them all amazingly, as they ducked and dodged hither and thither to be out of the reach of his riding whip, and all whooping off together they tumbled in a pile of immeasurable giggle on the withered turf under the veranda, where they kicked up their heels and shouted to their full satisfaction.
"If I had the little devils," muttered Haley between his teeth.
"But you hain't got them, though," said Andy, with a triumphant flourish, and making a string of indescribable mouths at the unfortunate trader's back when he was fairly beyond hearing.
"I say now, Shelby, this yere's a most extraordinary business," said Haley, as he abruptly entered the parlor. "It seems that gal's off with her young'un."
"Mr. Haley, Mrs. Shelby is present," said Mr. Shelby.
"I beg pardon, ma'am," said Haley, bowing slightly with a still lowering brow. "But still I say, as I said before, this yere's a singular report. Is it true, sir?"
"Sir," said Mr. Shelby, "if you wish to communicate with me, you must observe something of the decorum of a gentleman. Andy, take Mr. Haley's hat and riding whip. Take a seat, sir. Yes, sir, I regret to say that the young woman, excited by overhearing or having reported to her something of this business, has taken her child in the night and made off."
"I did expect fair dealing in this matter, I confess," said Haley.
"Well, sir," said Mr. Shelby, turning sharply round upon him, "what am I to understand by that remark? If any man calls my honor in question, I have but one answer for him." The trader cowered at this, and in a somewhat lower tone said that
"It was plaguey hard on a fellow that had made a fair bargain to be gulled that way."
"Mr. Haley," said Mr. Shelby, "if I did not think you had some cause for disappointment, I should not have borne from you the rude and unceremonious style of your entrance into my parlor this morning. I say thus much, however, since appearances call for it, that I shall allow of no insinuations cast upon me, as if I were at all partner to any unfairness in this matter. Moreover, I shall feel bound to give you every assistance in the use of horses, servants, etc., in the recovery of your property. So, in short, Haley," said he, suddenly dropping from the tone of dignified coolness to his ordinary one of easy frankness, "the best way for you is to keep good-natured and eat some breakfast, and we will then see what is to be done." Mrs. Shelby now rose, and said her engagements would prevent her being at the breakfast table that morning, and deputing a very respectable mulatto woman to attend to the gentleman's coffee at the sideboard, she left the room.
"Old lady don't like your humble servant, over and above," said Haley, with an uneasy effort to be very familiar.
"I am not accustomed to hear my wife spoken of with such freedom," said Mr. Shelby dryly.
Beg pardon. Of course, only a joke, you know, said Haley, forcing a laugh.
Some jokes are less agreeable than others, rejoined Shelby.
Devilish free now I've signed those papers, cuss him, muttered Haley to himself. Quite grand since yesterday.
Never did fall of any prime minister at court occasion wider surges of sensation than the report of Tom's fate among his compeers on the place. It was the topic in every mouth, everywhere, and nothing was done in the house or in the field but to discuss its probable results. Eliza's flight, an unprecedented event on the place, was also a great accessory in stimulating the general excitement. Black Sam, as he was commonly called, from his being about 3 shades blacker than any other son of ebony on the place, was revolving the matter profoundly in all its phases and bearings, with a comprehensiveness of vision and a strict lookout to his own personal well-being that would have done credit to any white patriot in Washington.
It's an ill wind that blow nowhere, that are fact,
said Sam, sententiously, giving an additional hoist to his pantaloons, and adroitly substituting a long nail in place of a missing suspender button, with which effort of mechanical genius he seemed highly delighted.
Yes, it's an ill wind blows nowhere, he repeated. Now, dar, Tom's down. Well, of course there's room for some nigger to be up. And why not this nigger? That's the idea. Tom, riding round the country, boots blacked, pass in his pocket, all grand as Cuffy, but who he? Now, why shouldn't Sam? That's what I want to know.
Halloo, Sam. Oh, Sam, Masters wants you to coach Bill and Jerry, said Andy, cutting short Sam's soliloquy.
Hi, what's the foot now, young'un?
Why, you don't know, I suppose, that Lizzie's cut stick and cleared out with her young'un.
You teach your granny, said Sam, with infinite contempt. Knowed it a heap sight sooner than you did. This nigger ain't so green now.
Well, anyhow, Master wants Bill and Jerry geared right up, and you and I's to go with Massa Haley to look arter her.
Good now, that's the time of day, said Sam. It's Sam that's called for in these here times. He's the nigger. See if I don't catch her now. Master'll see what Sam can do.
Ah, but Sam, said Andy, you'd better think twice, for Mrs. don't want her cotched, and she'll be in your wool.
Hi, said Sam, opening his eyes. How you know that?
Heard her say so, my own self, this blessed morning when I bring in Martha's shaving water. She sent me to see why Lizzie didn't come to dress her, and when I told her she was off, she just raz up and says she, the Lord be praised, and Master he seemed rail mad, and says he, wife, you talk like a fool. But Lord, she'll bring him too. I knows well enough how that'll be. It's allers best to stand Mrs. side of the fence, now I tell you.
Black Sam, upon this, scratched his woolly pate, which, if it did not contain very profound wisdom, still contained a great deal of a particular species much in demand among politicians of all complexions and countries, and vulgarly denominated knowing which side the bread is buttered. So, stopping with grave consideration, he again gave a hitch to his pantaloons, which was his regularly organized method of assisting his mental perplexities.
There ain't no saying never
about no kind of thing in this here world, he said at last. Sam spoke like a philosopher, emphasizing this as if he had had a large experience in different sorts of worlds, and therefore had come to his conclusions advisedly.
Now, certain I'd have said that Mrs. would have scored the varsal world after Lizzie, added Sam thoughtfully.
So she would, said Andy, but can't you see through the ladder, you black nigger? Mrs. don't want this here Massa Haley to get Lizzie's boy, that's to go.
Hi, said Sam, with an indescribable intonation known only to those who have heard it among the Negroes.
I'll tell you more and all, said Andy. I specs you'd better be making tracks for them horses, mighty sudden, too, for I hear Mrs. quirin' arter yer, so you stood fooling long enough.
Sam, upon this, began to bestir himself in real earnest, and after a while appeared bearing down gloriously toward the house, with Bill and Jerry in full canter, and adroitly throwing himself off before they had had any idea of stopping, he brought them up alongside of the horse-post like a tornado. Haley's horse, which was a skittish young colt, winced and bounced and pulled hard at his halter.
Ho, ho, said Sam. Skeery, are you?
And his black visage lighted up with a curious mischievous gleam.
I'll fix you now, said he.
There was a large beech tree overshadowing the place, and the small, sharp, triangular beech nuts lay scattered thickly on the ground. With one of these in his fingers, Sam approached the colt, stroked and patted, and seemed apparently busy in soothing his agitation. On pretense of adjusting the saddle, he adroitly slipped under the sharp little nut in such a manner that the least weight brought upon the saddle would annoy the nervous sensibilities of the animal without leaving any perceptible graze or wound.
"Dar," he said, rolling his eyes with an approving grin. "Me fix 'em."
At this moment Mrs. Shelby appeared on the balcony, beckoning to him. Sam approached with as good a determination to pay court as did ever suitor after a vacant place at St. James or Washington.
"Why have you been loitering so, Sam? I sent Andy to tell you to hurry."
"Lord bless you, missus," said Sam. "Horses won't be cotched all in a minute. They done cleared out way down to the south pasture, and the Lord knows whar."
"Sam, how often must I tell you not to say Lord bless you and the Lord knows and such things? It's wicked."
"Oh, Lord bless my soul, I done forgot, missus. I won't say nothing of the sort no more."
"Why, Sam, you just have said it again."
"Did I? Oh, Lord, I didn't go for to say it."
"You must be careful, Sam."
"Just let me get my breath, missus, and I'll start fair. I'll be very careful."
"Well, Sam, you are to go with Mr. Haley to show him the road and help him. Be careful of the horses, Sam. You know Jerry was a little lame last week. Don't ride them too fast."
Mrs. Shelby spoke the last words with a low voice and strong emphasis.
"Let this child alone for that,"
said Sam, rolling up his eye with a volume of meaning.
"Lord knows, hi, didn't I say that?"
said he, suddenly catching his breath with a ludicrous flourish of apprehension which made his mistress laugh, spite herself.
"Yes, missus, I'll look out for the horses. Now, Andy," said
Sam, returning to his stand under the beech trees,
"you see I wouldn't be tall surprised if that our gentleman critter should give a fling by and by when he comes to be getting up. You know, Andy, critters will do such things."
And therewith Sam poked Andy in the side in a highly suggestive manner.
"Hi," said Andy, with an air of instant appreciation. "Yes, you see, Andy, missus wants to make time. Dat ar's clear to der most ordinary observer. I just make a little for her. Now, you see, get all these dar horses loose, carperin' permiscus round this yar lot and down to the wood dar, and I spec Masser'll won't be off in a hurry."
Andy grinned.
"You see," said Sam, "you see, Andy, if any such thing should happen as that Masser Haley's horse should begin to act contrary and cut up, you and I just let's go arn to help him, and we'll help him, oh yes."
And Sam and Andy laid their heads back on their shoulders and broke into a low, immoderate laugh, snapping their fingers and flourishing their heels with exquisite delight. At this instant,
For those who just joined us, this is going to be our last chapter for the day. We almost done. This is chapter 6. For those who just joined us, welcome to the discussion. If you missed it, you're going to have to go to the beginning. This is Uncle Tom's Cabin. We're listening together, Left Project, discussing. There's a lot going on. Just to recap, Eliza's on the run. And if you look at what they're talking about at Black Sam, he's jockeying for position because this is what's happening. You have your favorites, so you can imagine that people are like, oh, Uncle Tom is the favorite, this, that, and the third. So Sam sees an opportunity. So when he gets wind that the missus really doesn't want Eliza to be caught, now he's going to be working on that behalf, not necessarily that he wants to let Eliza go free, is that he wants to look good in the missus' eyesight. So that's kind of what's going on. They're doing this is one of the tactics that, or ways in which melanated people resisted. A lot of people thought that if you didn't just run away, or if you didn't fight, or if you didn't do something, you weren't resisting. But one of the ways in which it is said that they resisted was through, breaking machinery or acting as if they didn't have any sense so that they can slow down the process. And so we see one of these ways of resistance right now as they're planning to slow up the process so that Eliza could have enough head time to run ahead. So I'm gonna play this last little bit here. Yeah, they a lot of rude stuff is going on, but hey, trigger alert. Let me just press play here.
Haley appeared on the veranda, somewhat mollified by certain cups of very good coffee. He came out smiling and talking in tolerably restored humor. Sam and Andy, clawing for certain fragmentary palm leaves, which they were in the habit of considering as hats, flew to the horse posts to be ready to help Masser. Sam's palm leaf had been ingeniously disentangled from all pretensions to braid as respects its brim, and the slivers, starting apart and standing upright, gave it a blazing air of freedom and defiance, quite equal to that of any Fiji chief, while the whole brim of Andy's being departed bodily. He rapped the crown on his head with a dexterous thump, and looked about well pleased, as if to say, "Who says I haven't got a hat?"
"Well, boys," said Haley, "look alive now. We must lose no time." "Not a bit of him, masser,"
said Sam, putting Haley's rein in his hand and holding his stirrup, while Andy was untying the other 2 horses. The instant Haley touched the saddle, the mettlesome creature bounded from the earth with a sudden spring that threw his master sprawling some feet off on the soft, dry turf. Sam, with frantic ejaculations, made a dive at the reins, but only succeeded in brushing the blazing palm leaf aforenamed into the horse's eyes, which by no means tended to allay the confusion of his nerves. So, with great vehemence, he overturned Sam, and giving 2 or 3 contemptuous snorts, flourished his heels vigorously in the air, and was soon prancing away towards the lower end of the lawn, followed by Bill and Jerry, whom Andy had not failed to let loose according to contract, speeding them off with various direful ejaculations. And now ensued a miscellaneous scene of confusion. Sam and Andy ran and shouted, dogs barked here and there, and Mike, Mose, Mandy, Fanny, and all the smaller specimens on the place, both male and female, raced, clapped hands, whooped, and shouted with outrageous officiousness and untiring zeal. Haley's horse, which was a white one and very fleet and spirited, appeared to enter into the spirit of the scene with great gusto, and having for his coursing ground a lawn of nearly half a mile in extent, gently sloping down on every side into indefinite woodland, he appeared to take infinite delight in seeing how near he could allow his pursuers to approach him, and then, when within a hand's breadth, whisk off with a start and a snort, like a mischievous beast as he was, and career far down into some alley of the woodlot. Nothing was further from Sam's mind than to have any one of the troop taken until such season as should seem to him most befitting, and the exertions that he made were certainly most heroic. Like the sword of Coeur de Lion, which always blazed in the front and thickest of the battle, Sam's palm leaf was to be seen everywhere when there was the least danger that a horse could be caught. There he would bear down full tilt, shouting, "Now for it! Catch him! Catch him!" in a way that would set everything to indiscriminate rout in a moment. Haley ran up and down and cursed and swore and stamped miscellaneously. Mr. Shelby in vain tried to shout directions from the balcony, and Mrs. Shelby from her chamber window alternately laughed and wondered, not without some inkling of what lay at the bottom of all this confusion. At last, about 12 o'clock, Sam appeared triumphant, mounted on Jerry, with Haley's horse by his side, reeking with sweat, but with flashing eyes and dilated nostrils, showing that the spirit of freedom had not yet entirely subsided. "He's cotched!" he exclaimed triumphantly. "If it hadn't been for me, they might have bust themselves all on 'em, but I cotched 'em." "You," growled Haley in no amiable mood, "if it hadn't been for you, this never would have happened." "Lord bless us, massa," said Sam in a tone of the deepest concern, "and me that has been racing and chasing till the sweat just pours off me." "Well, well," said Haley, "you've lost me near 3 hours with your cursed nonsense. Now let's be off, and have no more fooling." "Why, massa," said Sam in a deprecating tone, "I believe you mean to kill us all clar, horses and all. Here we are all just ready to drop down, and the critters all in a reek of sweat. Why, Massa won't think of starting on now till arter dinner. Massa Hoss wants rubbing down. See how he splashed himself? And Jerry limps, too. Don't think Missus would be willing to have us start this yar way, nohow. Lord bless you, Massa, we can catch up if we do stop. Lizzie never was no great of a walker." Mrs. Shelby, who, greatly to her amusement, had overheard this conversation from the veranda, now resolved to do her part. She came forward, and, courteously expressing her concern for Haley's accident, pressed him to stay to dinner, saying that the cook should bring it on the table immediately. Thus, all things considered, Haley, with rather an equivocal grace, proceeded to the parlor, while Sam, rolling his eyes after him with unutterable meaning, proceeded gravely with the horses to the stable-yard. "Did you see him, Andy? Did you see him?" said Sam, when he had got fairly beyond the shelter of the barn and fastened the horse to a post.
Oh, Lord, if it wasn't as good as a meeting now, to see him a-dancing and kicking and swaring at us. Didn't I hear him? Swar away, old fellow, says I to myself. Will you have your hoss now, or wait till you catch him? Says I. Lord, Andy, I think I can see him now. And Sam and Andy leaned up against the barn and laughed to their hearts' content. You're oughter seen how mad he looked when I brought his hoss up. Lord, he'd have killed me if he durst to. And there I was, a-standing as innercent and as humble. Lord, I seed you, said Andy. Ain't you an old hoss, Sam? Rather specs I am, said Sam. Did you see Mrs. upstairs at the winder? I seed her laughing. I'm sure I was racing, so I didn't see nothing, said Andy. Well, you see, said Sam, proceeding gravely to wash down Haley's pony, I's acquired what you may call a habit of observation, Andy. It's a very important habit, Andy, and I commend you to be cultivating it now you're young. I stepped that hind foot, Andy. You see, Andy, it's observation makes all difference in niggers. Didn't I see which way the wind blew this year morning? Didn't I see what Miss wanted, though she never let on? That is observation, Andy. I specs it's what you may call a faculty. Faculties is different in different peoples, but cultivation on 'em goes a great way. I guess if I hadn't helped your observation this morning, you wouldn't have seen your way so smart, said Andy. Andy, said Sam, you's a promising child. There ain't no matter of doubt. I thinks lots of you, Andy, and I don't feel no ways ashamed to take ideas from you. We oughtn't to overlook nobody, Andy, 'cause the smarter on us gets tripped up sometimes. And so, Andy, let's go up to the house now. I'll be bound Miss'll keep us an uncommon good bite this year time. End of chapter 6.
Did they say observation? I'm trying to be mature here, but they tripping. Those who just joined us, this is Uncle Tom's Cabin, chapter 4, 5, and 6. And yeah, that was an interesting. The next chapter is going to be lit. So yeah, definitely, most I willing, we'll come back tomorrow and get into that. Liza's on the run. For those who just joined us, you can definitely go back and listen to the parts that you missed, the lead up to it. She literally like, and this is something also to consider that many of these decisions, in some time, in some spaces, there wasn't any lead time, and so you see kind of that like do or die mentality even in today's space and time. Not saying that other people groups don't have this, but you see it more so in the melanated community, and you see it on the back end, like when they end up in paternity court, or you see this like split second decision making of things that's going to affect your entire life. Like you met the person for one day at the gas station, and the next thing you know, they're your baby daddy, and the judge is like, well, how did that happen? You coming from a space where you had to make second decisions for something that was going to affect your life. Chloe, like I said before, what she was over there playing like the good mammy, and as soon as she heard it, she was like, Tom, let's go. You know what I mean? And Tom had to make that split second decision whether or not he's going to go, he's going to stay. Same thing happened with Eliza, and that adrenaline kick in. And that's one of the things that many of us are still addicted to, that high level of drama, adrenaline, and these are the things that enliven us. So when you talk about things where not all, but I'm talking about epigenetics and stress markers and how things are passed down, this is also something real and present to look at, the things that you experience in times past and how they reacted to it, and why we may be overreactive in this space and time, because your adrenaline is supposed to peak, and your stress levels are supposed to peak, and then they're supposed to even out. But if you're making split second decisions, and then you're running, and then you're trying to get to a place, and then you're uncertain when you get to the place, and you're always living from moment to moment on this high levels of energy, and you have children and they have children, and the energy is still here, even though the real and present danger may not be as it was in that time. So that's just also something to think about and to consider. For those who just joined us, feel free to leave your thoughts in the box. As I said before, I try to make notes along the way so I can remember some things that I want to touch on. Observation was everything. Queen T, thanks for sharing. Um, so once again, if you're enjoying it and you see the value, share it with your friends and family, and we can collectively have the discussions that can help facilitate our healing. because it's it's there, it's left on record. So with that said, yeah, I look forward to what's going on with Eliza tomorrow. Um, I'm just going back to make sure I didn't miss anything. That's pretty much it. So with that said, thank everybody for tuning in. We'll come back once again and have more. Not thinking things through and realizing we don't have the answer on the spot. They can't wait. Yeah, yeah, and that comes from real life experience, not having an opportunity to think things through. And we're still doing it today, like thinking, like making these life altering decisions just like that. That comes from somewhere. It's not that, oh, you're just so irresponsible or whatever, whatever. It comes from somewhere, and we can see where it's coming from. Just like that. Oh, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna stay, fight, or flight? Am I gonna fight this dude? Tom said he gonna fight. Whatever comes, he gonna stand up in it. And Eliza's like, I'm out. And she didn't even run for herself. She ran for her child because he couldn't run for himself. So she ran to give him an opportunity. You know, so that's also, something that we can just jot down and take a look at. And then you look at family history, and you usually can tell where the injury is because the energy kind of continues to reoccur. You know what I mean? Is it in relationships? Is it within money, economics? Is it within stability? Where is it? You may see your grandmother, grandfather. You may see somebody in your family or people in your family, aunts, uncles, brothers. You have the same energy that keeps recycling, and then you can say, aha, this is where the injury is for my particular family. You know what I mean? Because let's if we use Tom as an example, well, whatever goes down, Tom now is going to have a different perspective on life than his wife Chloe. His wife Chloe is going to be, well, I don't know the fullness because I'm listening while y'all listening, but Chloe, if she stays, is going to be the one who has a different perspective about staying and your husband leaving you and you can't trust and this, that, and the third. You know what I mean? So her narrative, although they were together, it branches off and then they each have these different pain points. You know what I'm saying? These different pressure points, these different experiences that they then pass on to their children and pass on to their children and pass on to the children. Correct epigenetic trauma. And this is why we listen to stuff like this in conjunction with the books that I share and the information and research, because like it's a reverse engineering of what's wrong with us. So if we can listen to the actual occurrences and how it happened in real time, and we can, like, we're there together. Like right now, I'm seeing them messing around on the horses. I'm seeing them trying to throw off the slave trader so that, you know what I mean? You actually get to see this in your mind's eye and feel how the person is feeling. Like Eliza's writing a note. I'm like, why are you writing a note, Eliza? Man, it's time to go out. But she felt obligated. She felt committed to this woman, and she was torn. She had to make a split second decision, and she chose her progeny over the relationship that she had with the slave master. You know what I mean? But she still felt compelled to, like. Then somebody would say, but I thought all slaves couldn't read. How is Eliza writing a note? So this is, you know what I'm saying? So because some could read and some could write, you know what I mean? And so this gives us a better handle, I think. Although this is a fictional occurrence and there was there are many, many real-time slave narratives, but we're going to work with it. Thank you again. We need this. You're welcome, Global Purpose. Queen T said, I learned that in business and I practice it now. All right now. All right now, everybody. So once again, where we at? We at almost 1:30. I mean, not 1:30, but the 1 hour, 30-minute mark. So we're going to come again. And I did go ahead a little bit and listen. So that's why I know the next chapter, we're going to need a fresh palette for the next chapter. Because, woo! All right. All right. Everybody have a blessed day. See you tomorrow. Hey, shalom, sister. Hey, what's going on, Sister Aisha? So come through tomorrow. I'm gonna go to the yummy and then come back, and then we're gonna come on here tomorrow around the same thing, around the same time. Okay, sis. If you missed it, go back to the replay, and if you guys missed all of it, and you might want to go back to chapter 1, so by tomorrow you'll be all caught up. We'll come around 8:30, and we'll get it in. All right. Everybody have a blessed day.